Good morning. I'm Susan Summers. I'm president of the International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, IMPEA, which was founded in 1997 and is an NGO in special consultative status of the United Nations. IMPEA's mission, acknowledging the diversity of culture, background, and lifestyle of the world's population, aimed to increase society's ability through international collaboration, recognize and respond to the mistreatment of older persons in whatever setting it occurs, so the later years of life will be free from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. IMPEA's motto is moving toward the culture. The World Health Organization, an intergovernmental agency, is the directing and coordinating authority for health within the United Nations system. It is responsible for providing leadership on global health policy. IMPEA has collaborated with the World Health Organization since IMPEA's founding to establish the foundations of elder abuse prevention and scholarship from an international perspective. First, let me tell you how pleased IMPEA is to be part of this important conference in Prague and to support the excellent work of experts in the Czech Republic and internationally. And I'd like to say a special thank you to Jan Lorman of Zivit 90, who's been the IMPEA national representative for many years and a good friend and a loyal supporter. I want to discuss 4 of the initiatives in which WHO and IMPEA have collaborated, and then identify potential gaps that other conference speakers will address. First is the Toronto Declaration on Elder Abuse definition. Elder abuse is a single or repeated act or lack of appropriate action occurring within any relationship where there's an expectation of trust, which causes harm or distress to an older person. It can be a variety of forms: physical, psychological, emotional, sexual, financial, or simply reflect intentional or unintentional. This declaration is a call for action aimed at the prevention of elder abuse. Then we have Missing Voices, a qualitative study on elder abuse. It's from the older person's perspective themselves and the work of research. The World Health Organization Network published Missing Voices, Views of Older Persons on Elder Abuse. This focus group-based report interviewed older persons in India, Kenya, Lebanon, Argentina, and Brazil, as well as in Sweden, Canada, and Austria. Main themes were remarkably similar and indeed suspected to be abuse. Older people perceived abuse under 3 broad categories. The first was neglect, including isolation, abandonment, and social isolation. Secondly, violation of human legal rights. Third was deprivation, choices, decisions, status, financials, and respect. This is as set forth by Dr. Quote from a participant in the study said that respect is better than food. Then we come to Chapter 5 of the World Health Organization, Elder Abuse. Scholarship and expanded definition. Dimensions of elder abuse related to variables such as characteristics of the victim, characteristics of the abuser or abusers, type of abuse, and location of abuse, to be more fully discussed by Jan Lorman. The WHO definition, which is very comprehensive, is further described in Chapter 5 of the WHO. The variables including settings for the abusive act, types of abusive act, characteristics of abusers and victims, and systemic abuse. Settings in which abuse can occur include homes, often associated with domestic violence, like spouse abuse and child abuse, workplace, and residential care facilities. Latter is often associated with frail elderly. Types of abuse include physical, psychological, and sexual neglect. Neglect assumes that victims are care dependent. Care is provided in the home or in the residential setting. Characteristics of the victim. Care dependent older adults will have cycle of impairment that render them unable to live independently. And most older persons are independent, vital members of their families and communities. Some have impairments that require them to be cared for in their homes or in residential. A victim's need for care and services does not cause abuse, but can identify characteristics of the World Health Organization definition of elder abuse defines an abuser as someone who has a trusted relationship. This can be a family member, adult child or a grandchild, spouse, a partner, other family member, a neighbor, friend, or formal or informal care provider. Well, all of these abusers can perpetrate abuse against the elderly in the home. Formal care providers can also perpetrate abuse against older persons in residential care facilities. However, some recent studies have identified other residents as perpetrators of abuse, particularly in dementia units. While staff members are not directly responsible for this, they are responsible for ensuring the safety of care home residents, managing the behavior of residents. Finally, institutional abuse may be perpetrated in residential facilities through neglect and insensitive routine, such as lack of nutrition and failure to provide sufficient safeguard for protection from disease, as we have well seen during this COVID pandemic. The fourth is the World Elder Abuse Awareness. Yeah. In 2006, to address this harm and to foster the public's sensitization to elder abuse, the International Network for Prevention of Elder Abuse initiated World Elder Abuse Day, designated the 15th as the day, later recognized as a UN Day by the General Assembly. Its resolution adopted. Well, the definition in General Declaration is necessarily abbreviated, and the expanded definition in Chapter 5, they still focus on specific acts associated with it. These are well known, the physical, psychological, financial settings in which abuse may be perpetrated. For example, the home and institution like care home. The expanded definition in Chapter 5 looks at systemic abuse in, for example, residential care facilities, not target a specific individual, but may more broadly harm individuals incidentally through their insensitive routines that serve the convenience of the institution and staff, detriment of specific residents. Missing are broad systemic abuses linked to ageism, gender discrimination, and importantly, effects of the life course disadvantages like poverty and social exclusion, and the need for remedies to these social inequities and ills. These require a human rights approach to understand and address them. And in fact, the human rights perspective is an emergent one in relation to elder abuse and neglect. I want to discuss some examples of global efforts to address the gaps in the normative framework of human rights of older persons. Open-ended working group on aging for the purposes of strengthening the protection of the human rights of older persons. The General Assembly established the working group, which has extended to its 11th session, only to have it fall prey to COVID-19 and be postponed. The mandate of the establishment of the General Assembly by resolution in December 2010 is to consider the existing international framework of the human rights of older persons and identify possible gaps in how best to address them, including by considering as appropriate the feasibility of further instrumental measures. We also have the independent expert on aging, and I'll discuss a bit of the implications. On World Elder Abuse Awareness Day in June 2020, the independent expert, Ms. Claudia Mela, urged governments and the international community to exercise global solidarity and step up action to effectively prevent and protect older people from physical and psychological abuse, neglect, She referred to distressing verbal and derogatory online abuse in the context of COVID-19 outbreak, noting that derogatory comments in the media constituted a direct attack against the dignity of older people. She urged states to implement and monitor measures to avoid ageist approaches and stressed that older persons have access to accountability mechanisms that provide for remedies and redress when their human rights are violated. This is all in her annual report. Then, with regards to NGOs and other stakeholders, one such stakeholder is a global alliance for ERA. PEA was among the 9 founding NGOs and took part in the active part in the launch of strengthening older persons' rights. Session. Although it's largely beyond the scope of WHO, which is focusing on an international public health model, it addresses and embraces a human approach to ending elder abuse. How does human rights lens elucidate the current crisis for the world population, and especially the world's older persons with the COVID-19? We know this is particularly critical for care-dependent older persons. While individual acts of commission or omission perpetrated by other individuals in these settings against residents, including other residents themselves, in the expanded definition, the failure to provide masks and other PPE or to make testing available to workers and residents, or ensuring immediate access to life-saving medical care to infected individuals, and allocating medical treatment based upon a person's age, examples of human rights violations of right to health, sitting within the WHO expanded definition of elder abuse. However, our human rights lens would deal deeper issues. For example, in a published chapter by Mary Beth Morrissey and colleagues, which examined healthcare disparities among nursing home residents, whose care is funded by Medicaid in the U.S. government, healthcare funding is a source for the indigent. They noted that outcomes of COVID were significantly more negative than those for residents whose care was privately funded. Women and ethnic minorities around the world at the end of their lives may be disproportionately deprived of needed resources. Both the UN Secretary General together with the absence of a dedicated internationally agreed legal framework, this contributes to the vulnerability of older persons and may have contributed inadequate response to the COVID-19 crisis. That's in his Secretary General's brief, COVID and older persons. I know that speakers like Professor Doran and others will address this in greater depth. Thus, I will conclude, as the UN Secretary General urged, we must act now to build stronger legal frameworks at both national and international levels to protect the human rights of older persons, including by accelerating the effort of the General Assembly's working group to develop proposals for an international legal instrument to promote and protect the rights and dignity of older persons. We need a convention. There is no time to waste. Lives are in the balance. Thank you for listening.